All right. All right. Well, welcome everybody who's joined. I don't want to start too late, but it is 3:34, so I think we should get started. And if you've gotten into this web session, you are interested in real estate and determining your strategy and plan. We want to welcome everybody. We want to thank our partners. They're listed there at the bottom. We've gotten unbelievable community support over these months, and we want to call out some of those that are supporting us. So thank you. So here's what we know. We know that, well, for instance, Cranes has done some really interesting reporting lately. Originally, we expected the dispensary licenses to be announced earlier this month. And then Craft Grow Infuser would be, and transportation announced in August. Ties were supposed to be determined in September. The latest understanding is that everyone's going to wind up getting announced in September. This might change, of course, from minute to minute. We're trying to figure that out. Another thing that we know is we had over 4,000 applicants for the 75 dispensary licenses. So that's a big ratio differential, a huge one. We had 455 craft grow applicants for 40 spots, and we had 114 applications for infuser, for the 40 infuser. So as we go into the other types, a much tighter ratio. So much better odds for those who applied to actually get their licenses. Um, Seems like there's some background noise, so I'm not sure. Uh, am I not muting everybody? Everybody should be muted. Well, anyway, sounds okay now. Okay, so when we designed this summer web series, we really wanted to come up with topics that would be the most relevant to where you all are in the life cycle of obtaining your license and executing this with intention, right? So for those who are able to attend our first series, we covered really sort of the political landscape a little bit more. We had Cook County commissioners with us. We sent questions and comments to state officials. We discussed efforts to lobby from an industry perspective as potentially an alternative industry voice. Today, we're going to cover the complex topic of real estate. If you have ever owned real estate residentially, you'll see a lot of parallels, but of course, it's different because we're talking commercial, and it's even more different because we're talking cannabis. So you'll want to really listen for some of the nuances today. Today, we're really meant to help, we're really trying to help you navigate this whole space more easily and anticipate some of the typical issues that you're likely to face along the way to help you make the process more seamless. In 2 weeks, on the 12th, we're going to go back to a Wednesday session. We're going to discuss the differences between your operations and application team and see if you should have the same people, why would you have different people, etc. And on the 26th of August, we're going to talk about how do you hit the ground running operationally? What do you do the minute that you hear that you've got a license? And what do you do first, second, third, that kind of thing. It's not an exhaustive list of topics, but we're trying to also get maybe for a session after that. Now that would be a new session, the 5th. The focus will be on raising capital, but we're going to hold off on that because we want to really make sure that we've got our ducks in a row for that. We know that that's a really big topic, especially in this community. And so we'll get back to you if that one really winds up happening. I want to make sure that in that space that there's really a level playing field and people do have the same amount of access as others have had traditionally. Now, getting back to the topic of real estate, we understand that it's particularly a challenging topic and even more so in the social equity space. If you haven't gone through the purchasing process in the past and you haven't worked through a builder on building out property, that's going to have its own set of circumstances and set of changes and things that you're going to want to really key in on. You might want to have somebody who's a builder or somebody who's an architect with you in some of this process. We're not going to go too much into that, but Holly is going to be touching on some of that here. One of the things that you'll see this session, as all sessions, are going to be recorded and posted on our website. And when we post it, we're going to also have some tips and some resources besides just the session. Ian will reference some of that, but we also have some from one of the builders that we work with. So you'll be able to look at that also online. So one thing that I read recently in Cranes was that recently they announced that 4,400 businesses locally are going to be going under as a result of COVID-19. And 2,500 of those companies will not be coming back. So while you may be really anxious about real estate and anxious about what that means for you, particularly because you've been holding it or whatever, you may actually find that there is some opportunity that you didn't anticipate in this space. And so it's really important that you're open to finding out whatever this is all about. So with no further ado, I want to really introduce our panelists here because it's really all about them and thank them profusely. So Holly DuPart, she began her foray into cannabis after a successful career in real estate. Former project manager for both the Cabrini Green and Kennedy King College redevelopment projects, honed her ability to create and bring large projects into life. After a double diagnosis with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, Holly began search of health through living a greener lifestyle. Cannabis became central to her healing process, and now she's developed a business and service to welcome others into the green life. Holly started the educational non-for-profit Common Sense Cannabis in 2016. In 2017, she began offering cannabis-friendly accommodations through her company, Lux Smarts. She is now bringing her naturally conscious, naturally luxurious CBD-infused products to the world through the brand name Can Essentials. Over the last 9 months or so, I've gotten to know Holly. She's a sharp businesswoman, has many talents and incredible style. She cares tremendously about her community and has agreed to give back more than just in this instance. Back in February or March, she helped applicants navigate and negotiate terms to obtain letters of intent for others' applications as well. So thank you, Holly. I'm really glad that you're here today. It's great to see you, even though you don't get to see me. And Holly, Holly shares the virtual stage with Ian Brown, who until now has been an attorney at Shapiro and Associates, and concentrates his practice in cannabis business, real estate, and government affairs, and all aspects of land use law. We lately got the unfortunate news that he's making a life change with his fiancée, leaving Chicago to be closer to their families in Louisiana. Ian has pretty much been a supporter and a great partner to Gromentum Labs since we got started. He's literally been to almost every event we've ever hosted and helped just a ton of applicants in our community. He's definitely been one of my main go-to guys when it comes to interpreting the law or anticipating when something big is coming out of Springfield. The good news is the nature of practicing law these days, a lot can be done remotely. And I'm thrilled that he'll be able to really never be too far away. He'll continue to support clients in Illinois, particularly around the issues of cannabis and real estate. We wish him well in future endeavors and as a valued part of our community who has made a mark as we launched. So thank you, Ian. And so I'm gonna get started, but I don't want to be remiss because we could get so overwhelmed. You might see a big Gromentum Lab sign here. AJ Atakora is our intern. He's been interning with us and with my Community Plan Foundation, another supporter of Gromentum, all summer long. And so we really owe a huge debt of respect to all the great work that he's done in setting us up and getting us all launched here. So thank you, AJ, and thank you, panelists. And let's get going here. We'll start with Holly. We're going to go, and by the way, we do have a couple things afterwards, but I did want to say if you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section and we will get to them in due time. So I wanted to get started with Holly and ask you, Holly, What are the main considerations that should drive your real estate strategy if you're awaiting your license, and why?
Well, we've had such wonderful and candid and thorough conversations about this topic. So there are a few highlights that we want to make sure that that we cover for everybody. But everyone, there's a lot of information that we're going to cover in this section. And so please ask as many questions as you want, and Amy will moderate the questions for us, and we will try to flow like that. The first thing I'd like to say, the first message that I'd like to say is don't panic. And Amy is absolutely correct that cannabis plus COVID equals opportunity, depending on how you look at it. And I think it all goes back to what type of business model you have, and it goes in your planning. So when it goes into your planning, you need to, of course, consider your funding and what we're able to afford, and then obviously your business model. How much do you need, and what do you need to scale to? So some people are starting off with a business model where they're very large and they're producing, at scale, or at a certain scale, at a large scale and capacity from inception, and other people are scaling up or even staying very boutique and small. So all of those things should be reflective of what you're looking for in your business model. Now, everybody knows location, location, location. It goes without saying. However, it's even much, much more important in cannabis in that you have to start with the location as opposed to a property. As I'm a managing broker, so I've done this before. I've done the teach. I've done all this stuff, and buyers love to shop. They love to look at properties. Everybody loves to look at properties, and we all see properties that would be perfect for, but it may not be perfect for this. So you have to start with the zoning, because it doesn't matter how perfect the property is. If it's not properly zoned, it doesn't matter. It's not going to be something that you can, move forward with. So you start with location. And one of the things that I was sharing with Amy is just a few of things, the way that I perceive things. And one in this industry, in cannabis, there's a lot of selling, and there's a lot of mystique. There's a lot of all. We don't have time to change opinions at this stage in the game. So we're aware that there's 180 days deadline that you have from the moment that you were told that you get the license to when you indicate, where you're going to be located, depending on what your license is for. So the clock is ticking. So you don't have the luxury of shopping as if you were buying a home. So you have to be much, much more targeted in how you're searching for properties. And so again, it goes back to carefully planning from the beginning and understanding importance of zoning. And Ian's going to chirp in, and I'm so sad we're going to be losing Ian, but he's going to chime in on zoning and what you should look for. But you want to go where you are celebrated, not tolerated. What that means is, because of the short amount of time that you have, you need to go into areas that are already receptive to cannabis, or that you have some ability to know with some certainty that you can have everything completely done before the clock ticks out. I own a property in a town, and I did not even apply under that property because I knew it wasn't going to happen, and there was no point in me wasting time. Knowing that it wasn't going to happen, I couldn't make it happen and want it to happen. You got to push that to the side. You have to be very, very strategic in what you're looking for. So again, you're looking for someone who is probably already accepting cannabis, so that you can already know what the criteria are going to be. And again, you can avail yourself of Ian's expertise in that. And he's been wonderful in helping me out on information as well. I spoke about scale. Now, there's obviously different types of licenses, and so parking will be an issue more with your transportation or dispensary than necessarily with your other two licenses. However, you have to, of course, think about ingress and egress of your trucks and deliveries. But outside of parking, which is important, and it depends on your business model, there are some business models that just take a coffee shop. Don't forget that cannabis is a product. So look at other business models and see how they look. So Starbucks will go into a neighborhood, but they won't have parking because a certain amount of their clients are looking for the convenience or the variety. But other coffee shops will focus on making sure that they have parking because they know that that's what their clientele are looking for. So again, it goes back to your planning, understanding who your target is, what they're looking for, and what's important to them. So keep that in mind as you're looking for issues. Now, always bear in mind, of course, that you need to have secure delivery areas that's just something you have to have. So either you need to make sure from inception it's a part of the property, or you have to be able to create it or build it into your plan. One of the other things we definitely talk about, everything is always contingent, typically contingent upon the amount of money that you have. So there's still different opportunities for you. So if you want to go new construction, you can still build new construction from building straight from the ground up, or you can even do modular. And that would be less costly and get you up and running faster. You still have to make sure that the zoning will, allow for that. However, you can still be creative, whichever direction you want to go. When you get into something that's already purchased, typically it's a purchase or a lease situation in the as-built. And sometimes we're even seeing what we had a long conversation about our lease back situations where.
Well, let's actually jump. Let me just ask a question if I can just interrupt right here, because I'd like to kind of get a little bit into zoning and then come back into the specific financing options, because I know that there are plenty of them. So if that's all right, Ian, could you give Holly mentioned zoning a little bit here, and I think that's probably a really good idea to think about what are the legal considerations that come to the picture when you're setting your strategy and you're setting your plan. And then we'll go more into the process of zoning after we kind of get to the next topic, if that works out.
Yeah, of course. So zoning is going to be, somewhat like a kind of how Holly started off. You're going to want to go somewhere that's, celebrated and not tolerated. And that's a really great starting point for kind of your consideration. And this kind of discussion probably is a little bit more applicable to dispensary applicants rather than craft grow applicants, only because as the craft grow applicants know, you already had to kind of go through that process for craft grow. However, it still may be important for you guys to consider, because things change going forward and properties fall through, or maybe you had to change plans or whatever. So from the kind of zoning perspective, there's only most zoning, just not to give you a big picture, but not to go too into detail in zoning generally, but it's important to have a little bit of an understanding of how zoning works and land use restrictions surrounding cannabis. So there's really only a few restrictions that are imposed at the state level, right? 1,500 feet from an existing dispensary, if you're a dispensary, or 1,500 feet from an existing craft grow, if you're craft grow, or infuser from an infuser. So that's one of the big ones from the state, and that's it's supposed to apply now. I don't know if you guys have stayed up to speed with some of the the regulations and decisions that have come out of IDFPR recently. One in particular, they awarded 2 licenses for a second location for dispensaries on the same day and within 1,500 feet of each other. So that was in River North area. I think it was PharmaCann and Mocha, I think. And they said that it didn't violate their 1,500 feet rule because they were awarded the same day, so there's no existing location there. I don't know. That was their own rule that they kind of threw out the window a little bit. Anyways, so just expect that still should apply for you guys, especially if there is an existing dispensary. That is, if you're awarded if you happen to be awarded the same day, and someone else gets awarded for a location, it's a little bit different. But anyways, let's just say that that's a rule, right? So that's one of the state restrictions. The other state restriction is that you can't be in an exclusively residentially zoned district. So from a state perspective, you can be in a mixed use district. So you could technically, from a state perspective, be at the first floor of a building that also contains residential above it. Now that may vary by what your local rules say. Another state rule to be mindful of. Actually, I'm sorry. Those are really the only 2 rules. I have a list here, but yeah, those are really the only 2 rules for state. Just no residential, exclusively residential, and 1,500 feet.
Awesome.
All other zoning and land use matters are really from local government. So it's going to be, you know, going back to what Holly said, you're really going to want to look at a community that is going to be more accepting of your just cannabis business in general, but specifically to what you are looking to do. Local governments under the statute have the right to prohibit. It's, you most likely know and seen in the news, a lot of these decisions coming out with local governments, you know, arguing whether or not they should allow for cannabis businesses. And this was particularly a hot topic in the last fall, and it's calmed down a little bit since. A lot of communities have made their decisions. Some have not. A lot have not. There's 1,300 municipalities in Illinois. They have more per capita than any other state, more municipalities than any other state. So there's a lot that's still out there, and a lot of them have said no. And that's not that uncommon. Just as a frame of reference, in Colorado and California, about 75% of municipalities ban cannabis businesses, right? So it's not uncommon for communities, you know, even more municipal or more mature states with more mature markets, that is, cannabis markets, they still don't allow for, a lot of them still don't allow for cannabis. Now that will probably open up as they see the benefits and that a lot of the perceived negative consequences of allowing cannabis don't actually come to fruition, but the benefits do: money, jobs, you know, social justice, etc. You know, they'll start to open up more and more, and that's what other states have seen too. So, but in the meantime, you want to focus your attention on what areas have at least, at minimum, you know, approved it. They don't necessarily have to have approved it, but it's going to make it a lot easier for you, right? They don't technically, they just have to technically have not banned it. But if they have an ordinance on the books that says it is allowed, what you want to do is allowed somewhere, that's at least, I would say, a minimum for, you know, most people. It's going to save some headaches, you know, if it's otherwise, right? So, and if they do allow it, then they can significantly limit the locations using their land use authority, which we typically know as zoning.
Yeah.
Zoning is the big way that local governments can restrict uses, and that's why we have suburbs very separated, you know, subdivisions, rather, residential subdivisions very separated from you know, commercial, which are then even separated from industrial areas, right? So that's, you know, that's zoning, and it gets a little bit more specific, right? You know, so you may have a residential district, but then there's different types of residential districts. You may have, you know, just by way of example, you know, R1, you know, the 1 indicates the level of intensity, and the R indicates residential. So you have single family is R1, so that's just a single family home, 1 family per home with a yard and everything. And then R2 is a little bit more intense. That may be a townhome. R3, multifamily, so an apartment building. R4, maybe, you know, a large building of apartments, you know, just a big apartment complex or something like that, a much more intense use. And the same level of, you know, same kind of structure applies for other types of, you know, commercial, or other types of land use, commercial, industrial, etc., goes up with intensity. And this is the similar type of structure that you'll see across communities. It may not be exactly like, you know, the community next door, but it will be pretty similar the way that they handle zoning, right? And so the community can decide, okay, we want to allow for cannabis to be in one specific area. You know, in commercial, so C2 and 3, so more intense commercial areas for dispensaries, let's say. But then they may require you, so say that's allowed there, but you have to get special permission. You know, so say you're looking for a building, you're going to want to make sure that you have, you know, at least the ability to apply for, you know, a rezone. So if your building is C1 and not C2, you're going to need to have a rezoning, and then you may need to have a special permission on top of that, which we call a conditional use. And I'll get a little bit more into that.
We'll get into that in a little bit. Awesome.
Yeah.
So then, so let's kind of stay up at the strategic level for just a minute. And
Sure.
how we were talking a little bit before about the business model that you have, and this really does play into ultimately what Ian's talking about, because if you're commercial, that means you're really all about dispensary, versus if you're grow or if you're infuser or even transportation, you might be more of an industrial manufacturing designation. And so you would need a different kind of zoning, but you also have sort of different considerations. Um, so, Holly, you and I were talking last week about really helping people think about like what their business is really all about and what it's going to require as a result. So, you glossed over a couple of these things, but I kind of think we should go a little bit more deeply into them. Besides just where you celebrate, where you're not, talk to me about the church situation and the dispensary next door, or the community that you're going to be in has to have some sort of a strategic drive for you being there. You're not just there because you had a nice smile.
Well, it
You're
should make
there
sense.
because you're doing something for the community, right?
Exactly. Exactly. It should make sense. Again, you just mentioned something about a church. So we were all, everyone who put in an application, was asked, how are you going to improve the community? And here's your opportunity to say, hey, I'm already involved with the church and we do this or we do that. So if you were to have a relationship from inception with the primary people who would be against you, then obviously that's going to make your way a lot easier. However, if you are coming in with a product that's geared towards the under 25 mass market, multiple purchase, high THC market, it's going to probably be a little bit tougher for the church to necessarily embrace that type of business model. But if you come in with a health model where you are like a pharmacy and you're helping them to help their patients to better utilize cannabis for health, then you see this sort of synergy where we're helping each other. There's a reason for us to bring you here because you can improve the community. So through the plans, some of that should have been enacted, and even and people have to remember this is a more than one round game. So even if you were not selected this round, if you started those relationships and things now, that would only significantly, substantially increase, the robustness of your application for the next round.
Well,
So you have to invest in yourself, your business model, and your community. And I was telling Amy about an example of back in my project management days, how people had spent lots of money bringing projects before a committee only to get bashed by the community completely because they didn't even know, they hadn't even tested the water to see what the community even wanted. They just assumed that they knew. And also people of color don't assume that you know what other people of color are looking for. You have to talk and ask people. So that just goes back to the second thing about being celebrated, in that if you are taking enough time to, and the thing about it too is you can't really pick your neighborhood necessarily up front too, which is another issue. But you have to think about these things when you're planning. You have to think about
well,
these
in some
things
communities,
and look for locations that are going to be better and easier to get to, because this could be a two-phase thing. You want to think in terms of, and certain people are thinking in terms of, I want to find the perfect forever home. And as a broker, I know that that's how people think, and that's not always the case. Most people buy up to their permanent home, and keep that in mind, that the strength of your business and the viability of your business in the beginning, a lot of that is going to be about your expenses, and one of your biggest ones is going to be your place, your mortgage, your rent. So you want to make sure that before you even get into business, that you put yourself in a position to be successful by not overburdening yourself with too much debt for the perfect place. The perfect place will be one that you can afford and in your budget.
awesome. And I just wanted to extend the point that you're making to something Ian and I talked about, which is if you're a craft grow and you're trying to do what you're doing in the city, people may not really understand your business model as well. And there might not need to be a lot more education versus taking your business to a farming community, which here in Illinois we have plenty of. And they may be more amenable to it because they just understand it better. So the dynamics of what each community is about has a lot to do with how amenable they will be to accepting you as a business person.
You're absolutely correct. And some of the other things I'd like to jump in and point out too while you're at it is that for me, I love to do everything close. So I'd love to stay, you know, in my community. However, back to the business model. If your business model is greenhouses, it's going to be very difficult to be able to find a place to do that type of business model. You're probably going to have to go to a farming community. So you have to think about things of that nature as well. The property, you know, the trucks coming back and forth, the timeline, all of those things have to be considered when you're looking for your location as well. Thanks for pointing that out.
No problem. All right, so Ian, I think this is probably the good time to jump right into the zoning process. And I think that people don't necessarily know that there's no way around a 3 to 6 month process generally.
There's really, unfortunately not. And that's, you know, I mean, even in a place that's amenable to your use, more amenable than, you know, more friendly to it, there's still, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to just buy a piece of property that's already zoned and you're good to go. You don't need to have any further zoning approvals done. It's possible. I'm not saying it's impossible. And there are some communities that where you can buy a particular property that happens to be a permitted use, permitted as of right, as opposed to needing a rezoning or special use permit. But you're most likely going to be looking at this type of process. So if you need to have a rezoning or sometimes you need a rezoning and a special use permit, or another word for a special use permit is a conditional use permit. They're relatively interchangeable depending on what community you're in, but you're going to have to go through this process most likely. So it does take, it's basically, you know, you don't necessarily have to have a piece of property purchased or even officially leased. The transaction of the lease or the purchase can be conditioned on, you know, the completion of that transaction can be conditioned on the successful application of a zoning approval. And so, this may be built into your contract, and you should definitely work with your agent and attorney if you have one. And for this, I would recommend it sometimes. I mean, unless you're more sophisticated in real estate, most people would benefit from getting some professional assistance through the process. But and I'm happy to talk about that if anyone has questions, what that looks like. But
I might actually add to that point that while you're trying to figure out where your property is and what property you're kind of interested in, that might be a good time as you work with somebody who's a professional in the space to go through zoning, that you also get an idea from a builder's perspective or an architect's perspective, what it will cost to get your property to where it needs to go. Now, in a minute, when we get through zoning, Holly's going to pick up and start talking about capital and raising capital and what that means. But as you're looking at a place and you're going, oh, that would be perfect for, before you make that calculation, you really need to find out how much would it cost to make it perfect for ... And so getting that in line, it will be helpful to get through the zoning process with somebody, either a builder or an architect or potentially someone who's both, to be able to help you with some of these steps that Ian's going to probably talk about.
Right. And you're going to need a professional. You don't necessarily, as I said before, you don't necessarily need an attorney, but you will almost certainly need someone who is able to put together plans to present to the community, because they're going to want to see your plans in somewhat surprising detail. I mean, you did have to submit certain plans, or you didn't have to, but for dispensaries, there was less requirements on the plans that you had to submit, but for craft grow, you had to submit a decent amount of plans. And so for the zoning process, they want to see, plans regarding a number of things that we've been talking about. So, traffic study, for example, they're going to want to know how people are going to go in and out of your building, how cars are going to go in and out of your parking lot, the intensity of that, if they're going to need to build another traffic light, because that's at least a concern of a lot of people. Oh, there's just, because especially after January 1st, there was lines out the door and concerns about overflow. And so traffic is typically important, but floor plans are a big one, security plans. A lot of plans are going to need to be going into this. Just submitting, in order to submit a full application for zoning. So you can see here in these different colored boxes here. So you determine the property, and with all that stuff in mind, starting, work with an architect-friendly neighborhood. And then, Amy, did you want me to go through the little boxes there?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yep.
Okay. So, and so first you want to connect with the department. Once you have kind of determined the location, talked with a landowner, maybe purchased it, then, have it under contract. Then you want to go ahead and connect with the department of, so that's typically going to be the planning department, right? There's almost always some type of level of planning department in a community, and where you are going to reach out. You should reach out to them and say, hey, this is my idea. Is this going to work here? Let's talk. And they're going to say, it might work there, or maybe they'll say it may not, and they may laugh you out of the room. So, you want to get their attention as early in the process as possible to make sure that you're not just, shouting at a wall at the end of the day. So they're going to say, if it is something that's possible there, they're going to say, let's have a, concept review or a workshop, is typically what a lot of communities will do. And that's really just a first step of, let's look at your plans, see what it is that it's going to be required, what type of approvals you're going to need in order to do what you want to do. And if there's any appetite in the community, because there may be absolutely no appetite for that, it may be in that particular space. Even if it's technically allowed, they may say you're going to have a lot of problems because there's an HOA right here, subdivision right here that has been very adamant against this, and good luck, and just a forewarning. So, but if they do say, all right, we're going to work with you a little bit, you should add a few things here to your plans. And then, these are the applications that you need to submit to us. That's the concept review. And then, so they'll say, okay, submit these, fill out these forms, compile all these plans for us. And it takes some work. It's not a small, application. You may have a lot of the materials together, and the form itself may not be that difficult to fill out. It can be relatively standard, but then you may also need to know how to address certain, if you need a special use or rezoning, there are state and local requirements, standards, that you'll need to submit in order to and address. So there may be several paragraphs, several pages, of written material that you need to say, this is why I deserve to have a rezoning. This is why I deserve to have the special use. And so that may be part of the application as well, most likely. And then on top of that, all those plans, right? Including this noise issues, elevation, right? So once you submit your application, the planning department will say, okay, your planning application is complete, or maybe you need to add some more stuff. But let's just say you finally submit a completed application. It's accepted by the department. You'll then be scheduled for an agenda. So most all public bodies meet on a regular basis, right? So this is your village board of trustees, but also the people underneath them. The plan commissions is typically what they're called, or is it planning and zoning commissions or something like that. They meet regularly, and those are typically going to be your first stop, right? So you are going to be assigned maybe the next public hearing that the Plan Commission has, or maybe even the next one, depending on how full their agenda is. So that's part of the reason why it may take maybe 2 or 3 months just to get to your first hearing, because of these other steps, working with the planning department, and then finding time, a time slot on the agenda for the Plan Commission to get on. So, and before once you get a date, before that date, you're going to have to send notice to all surrounding property owners, typically within somewhere between 250 and 400 feet, which can be a lot, or it can be very few, depending on the type of neighborhood that you're in. And it can be pretty tedious and actually very expensive, depending on how many notices you need to send out, because sometimes it's required that you do certified mailing, and return receipt requested, which is, I think, I forget how the going rate, but it's like, somewhere a little less than $10 per. And so if you have to send out to 100 people, it gets up there, right? So just be prepared for that part of just preparing for the hearing. And then at the hearing, it's gonna be, a little bit, I don't know if a lot of people have never been to a public hearing before. If you're going to one, I would highly encourage you to start just listening in on some, especially some more contentious ones. Just to get a feel for it. It can be a little bit, it's something between going to court and being in front of a mob, because there's a lot of questions, both from the Plan Commission, and sometimes from planning staff, but also, from the public, for better or worse. And so that's why it's, important to be prepared, and it can help definitely to have, some support with you. Typically, the applicant themselves will talk, but also, oftentimes an attorney will make a presentation, and even more frequently, an architect will make a presentation just to kind of walk the community through, here's how everything's going to work, here's the plans, and let me walk through everything. And the community has a chance to kind of ask questions about those plans. After that Plan Commission hearing, they'll provide, kind of some feedback. And in which case they'll say, we don't like this, we do like this. You should change it this way in order to, get, we'll approve it. Or they'll submit a, so it's a non-binding approval, that it's more of a, typically it's more of a guide to how the higher up body, the city council or the village board should vote, based on the Plan Commission's, recommendation. And then so you can adjust your plans accordingly before you kind of submit the final plan to the village board. And then you have to get on the village board's agenda, which is typically about a month later, depending on how busy they are. If there's holidays or something like that, could be another couple months before you get on the agenda. And then if the village board, they may ask you some questions, a little bit less of a hearing, or city council is a little bit less of a hearing. So it's more of straightforward, a little bit less intense, but that is the final vote. And so you may need to do some, lobbying in the meantime, just making sure that they don't have any questions, or if they did, seeing where your votes are going to fall. And then they make the final vote. Sometimes there's a vote, and then there's a second reading, or maybe they ask you to change something before you come back. And so then that would be another month. So that's where, these timelines can get so long. 3 to 6 months, I would say, is average in Illinois. But I've seen, I've never seen anything quicker than 3 months personally, but I have seen a lot longer than 6 months, especially for more contentious stuff.
Ian, that does not sound so much fun. It does not sound like what I want to be doing on a Saturday night or anything like that. But let me just ask you about, so I know that the people who applied for infuser and craft grow licenses, they had to get something signed for zoning. They didn't go through all this. So is it still required that they go through all that? Like, how does that,
Oh, yeah.
How does that connect, what they did connect with this process?
Yeah, so it depends. So what they had to do is identify a property, and then approach the local government where the property is, and say, and have the zoning form in the application signed. And that was it basically. And all
But
they
the
had,
zoning form was just like to say this is zoned appropriately for the kind of business you want to
they
have.
did, that was one of the options. Yeah. So there was a few options on it. One of them was, this is, it's basically, it's zoned. So if it's allowed in C2, even if, as an example, that maybe dispensaries are allowed in C2, but you actually also have to get a conditional use permit, then they could check a box. They could also check a box that says we don't have anything, we haven't passed, because at that point, a lot of governments had not actually enacted any craft grow ordinance. And they could check, the local government could check a box saying we don't have anything on the books, and they could sign it, and that was okay. Because as long as it's not prohibited, and as long as the community hadn't already made the final decision to prohibit a craft grow, then it could be signed. So, there was,
Still
in
have to
theory,
go through all this.
sorry, go ahead.
They still have to go through all this.
Yeah, it's
They got
very, I don't know any craft grow applicants who have gone through all this.
Okay.
All they really needed to do was have a very, very preliminary check of the box and a signature from the
Okay.
planning department.
So that's still something to plan. Okay, thank you. Now, I just wanted to point two things out. If you see at the very bottom of the page, Ian talked about a couple things, and so did Holly. Holly talked about go where you're celebrated, not tolerated. Ian has so thankfully put together a list of resources plus just a list of the municipalities from a dispensary perspective that have voted saying that they're okay with the dispensary. We will have that for you all. It's an amazing piece of work. It's not an end all be all because it doesn't have the craft grow and infuser, but at least it will get you half the way there to know where you would be closer to being celebrated. Especially if you're thinking, well, Chicago is going to be too difficult to deal with because of how tight it is and because of all of the lottery, and you don't want to be stuck in a lottery somewhere where you don't really want to be. This list will be really, really super for you. And then the other thing is that he talked about this whole workshop concept. And at the workshop, there's specific documents you need to bring with you. And they're pretty standard, although they'll be different from business to business. So he also put together a list based on the emergency rules and based on the FAQs that came out of the emergency rules on what all those documents would need to be. And so we will have those lists up online as well. And I just really wanted to thank you for that, Ian, because that is super.
Of course.
It'd be very hard to do for people to navigate that. So,
Of course.
okay, so let's go back. I'm going to go back to the previous slide because we were talking, Holly, about, we talked about the business model. Now let's talk really quickly about the capital stack and what that really means. You were talking about all the different options someone has, whether they're going to build or lease, whether they're going to build out or do something else. Let's talk about that. And then let's talk about real estate plays to finance as well, because that's complicated stuff. And let's take it like one by one. I've got those items here on the slide, and I just want to make sure people understand what those things are about.
Okay. First, we're talking about buy lease. As I indicated early on, COVID has created a whole new ballgame in a number of ways, and where people were looking before and they were focusing on buying because they had concerns about landlord control, rent increases. Now, you've got a lot more properties that are going to be out there on the market. You're even going to have some people, there may be a percentage of people who even won a license that may not be able to pull the trigger any longer. Due to financial things that happen. So it's impacting people in so many different ways, you just don't know. So you always should plan what's best for your plan. So buy or lease. Buy, you can. And again, I think that you're walking into a lot of opportunity right now. So I would suggest, just as we suggested earlier, that you have a seasoned zoning person on your side. You should find a cannabis specific real estate person. And the reason I say that is because they'll already understand the whole zoning. They're already understanding the basic parameters in which you have to search if you have not already found the property. Again, if you are buying, you're probably already under contract, probably can't get out of it to renegotiate, and you probably wish you could. Again, it's, you know, everybody's guess at this point. Leasing, you're not, you know, leasing's not going to be a terrible situation, because what you're seeing is that lease prices are coming down anywhere from 1 to 4%. You know, could be higher in certain areas. Even retail, some retail spots, you're gonna see a lot of retail spots coming back on as well. So I think that lease opportunities are still great if you have someone negotiating very strongly on your side, meaning that they're taking care of everything that you're concerned about rent increases, about build outs, who takes care of stuff, anything you're concerned about, you know, have it in your lease. Now, whether or not you're buying or leasing, 99 times out of 100, you're going to have to build out your premises. And this, I completely concur. You've got to have a professional team. You know, I'm in real estate, I do a lot of rehabs and flips. And I've had the experience of going with the neighborhood guy to save money versus a professional contractor who is a subject matter expert in whatever it is that you need. And it's a time cost thing. You can figure it out. You can quantify it. But in this particular case, what's most important is having someone sophisticated enough to be able to navigate on your behalf within the time constraints that you're working in. You just don't have a lot of room for error here. You really want to go with someone that's seasoned. So I was asked by Amy, what type of, you know, dollars are you looking at for costs? And perhaps you all already know this, that in a regular construction, you're looking at on the really low end, if you're doing DIY, $75 an hour, you can't do that. So you're really looking more in that $200 square foot and up area. And that also is because, as someone pointed out, you have additional security needs. Now, some of your security needs are going to be absorbed in your security plan, but that's more equipment specifically for security. What I'm talking about is designing around security. So let's say you decided to put some sort of window things in. That's an architectural thing. That's not necessarily coming under your security plans. The cameras that will go on the security plan will more be, you know, or less be on there. But the point is that you'd want to consider these things as part of your build out as well. So on a personal level, I would strongly suggest to you that this is not the time to try to cut corners. You've got to get in the game. And so you need to be able to have enough funding to be able to provide, to have the right professionals around you to help you to get this, you know, get into the game so you can be successful and hire your friends. So we spoke a little.
Let's talk about some financial opportunities, some ways real estate could be used in the equation of financing.
Well, we talked about there's a number of things, like I have a property. If you have a property already, you can do things with the property that exists to be able to acquire another property. You probably are aware of those sort of things. But in particular, what we're talking about here is there's something going on in the cannabis world and real estate right now, where you're seeing a number of people who are selling the properties, cannabis businesses, especially your multi-state operators where they own multiple properties. You're seeing them selling their properties and then leasing them back. And I actually did this, and people couldn't understand, and the numbers were better. It was actually, it was better for me financially to lease than to own. And let me give you an example. Municipalities started this a few years ago, and some small towns started getting really strapped for cash. They had these big, beautiful buildings that they were in, but no money to run their villages and towns and to put more into the towns. So they found long-term real estate investors who are more interested in long-term income, who purchased their properties back from them, giving them basically a bank account of money to go out and do things for their community, and they pay a monthly rent back to those people. Everybody is happy. So it's the same thing with cannabis companies, where you're seeing companies who initially bought because they were concerned about property control costs and acquiring certain properties. They're so cash strapped to free up cash. Now they're selling their properties to a friend landlord, if you will, where they have a relationship where they lease back at favorable rates, even favorable, meaning that like they're even getting some of their, I talked about earlier how you usually get a white box in a commercial property and then you have to spend money to build it out. People are even recouping some of their build out expenses too. So it's all in how you negotiate it, but that's something that's new, a little bit on the sophisticated side, which is really what makes it fun. However, that's the cool thing about real estate, there's a lot of things that can happen here. So then Amy asked me, were there any situations where you could lease and someone would build a property for you? And those are rare, but they do exist. And that kind of is more kind of part of your funding plan, a sophisticated funding plan, where you're already working with people knowing that, they're building they're already that sort of long-term investor, and they're creating this property for you as a long-term tenant. Yes, it could happen, obviously that's not something that's very customized and unique, but sure, it could happen as well. One last thing I want to hit on really quickly that we had such a fun time talking about, and it's about thinking outside of the box. This is a competition. And once the competition is over, you're still in competition with the other people who are licensees as well. So how do you make your business stand out? How do you get up and running? And one of the things that is a barrier to success is the time that it's going to take from the moment you get a license to the moment that you're making and closing your first sale, be it growing seed and putting a product in a dispensary, making a sale to a retail customer, or making a delivery. Whatever it is, there's going to be a time gap. So how do you close those gaps? And one thing that we came up with for cultivation centers and for infusers, there are some prefab shipping containers out there that, again, this is where Ian would come in, where you make sure that the zoning would actually allow that. But this would allow people to have a lab built out already that you're up and running in, let's say, 3 weeks, as opposed to 3 months, 6 months, or whatever your build out time is going to be. Leasing from owners with a mortgage. I'm not sure what that means. Leasing from owners.
That was all about if your owner has a mortgage that's backed by a federally insured bank.
Oh, well, you can. So
Right.
you should have known that up front. So and by the way, I want for the people who have been through this process, I want to acknowledge how difficult this was to navigate, to actually obtain a property. For those of you all who have not, it is very difficult to navigate. There are a number of things that were barriers to success. And one of those things was that the person who actually owned the property had to give consent. Anyone who had an interest in the property had to give consent. And if there was any sort of mortgage debt on it, typically it was federally insured, so therefore you would not get consent. So it was very difficult navigating this. So I commend anybody who was able to successfully acquire a property. Why it was a requirement is a time for another conversation another day.
That's the time for a happy hour. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the very specific situations of where people would be if they're hoping to get the dispensary license, the craft grower, infusion, or transportation. If Holly, you could give me like one comment on each of these situations, and Ian, you could give me one comment on each of these situations, that would be great. I do know that we have a number of questions that are specific to these type of things, and I know that a lot of people's questions are scenario based, so I wanted to make sure we hit this.
Well, I can't tell you enough that once you find a place that's amenable to you, because that's the number one thing you want to look for, you want to go back to your business plan and say, who is my target market? What are their needs? And to look for properties that would allow you to provide for that. We talked about parking. Obviously that's an issue for most people. Safety is an issue. How far is that parking lot? So all kinds of different things. And so that's as far as the changes to the rules, you know, this plane is being built in flight and things are changing constantly and we do the best that we can. However, you can only be so responsive. And there are people, as we already see, have already acquired properties and are paying for them and lost them already during this debacle that's happening. So try to be as flexible as you can. And I would strongly, encourage you in this time, if you're not already tied into a property, negotiate the absolute best scenario you can for yourself. You only have one time to ask for absolutely everything you need to be successful, and you should do that.
Great.
That's what I got right so far.
Perfect. Great. Ian, what do you have to say about any of these specific types of situations? And you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So I would just say, don't forget how long zoning can take, because it can make or break a project. And I see it all the time. And don't underestimate your ability to get through it successfully. I can't tell you how many times I have, we've heard, oh yeah, no, I know the mayor, or I know the planning commissioner or whatever, and we're in. It so often does not go that way. And whenever I hear that, I get concerned. So.
All right, awesome. All right, so I know that we're really up against the end of the time. We can stay on to do a couple questions for people. So this is what I want to ask people to do. If you do want to ask some questions, you can see the Q&A, and then we can either unmute you or we can read off your questions. Just know that this session is being recorded, and if you don't want to be in the recording, we'll be happy to just answer your questions or answers. Just let us know in the questions that you've asked. As you're thinking of your questions, writing them down, I wanted to let everybody know of a great opportunity. We are announcing the Grow Prentice Ancillary Inaugural Program, which is going to be starting in autumn of 2020. We are working with a couple, very few ancillary companies that for people who want to break into cannabis, they've been either working in a related field or they can see the potential of working in this field, but they don't really know how to break into it. It's not going to be as broad of an opportunity as we hope that it will get to be eventually, but the idea is that these companies will provide an opportunity for apprentices to work for about 4 months. They'll be mentoring and providing the tools to get their jobs done. And interns would also have to qualify as social equity. We will make sure that they can match their schedule to that of the company that they're working with. But so if you know of anybody who would be interested specifically in security, construction, architecture, technology platforms, those would be really good starting points because we have companies that are interested in helping people get started in that. You can get in touch with me. Everybody pretty much knows how to do that. And so with no other questions, we'll go into the questions segment right now. I can see that there are 3 questions there already. One of them is up there. It is Jonathan Valdez. I'm going to assume that you just want me to read it off. It's a 2-part question regarding the craft grow facility. Was it a requirement to have control of real estate property along with CAD drawings for the build out and plans for a build out? Is part 1. And part 2, what if the applicant loses possession of the building due to delays, COVID, etc.? Does it pose a problem for the application submitted, or will the applicant be able to find a new space if they were awarded a license without a penalty? How about Ian? You want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. CAD drawings were not specifically called out in the application, but it would have been sufficient. A relatively simple CAD drawing would have been sufficient for craft grow, along with some other plans, architectural drawings, a certain degree of floor plans were required. Site plan showing building footprint, travel ways, parking, drainage facilities, sanitary sewers, water lines. That will be in the document that Amy referred to earlier, showing which plans are going to be were required for the application, which types of plans are going to be required before you get licensed, but after they announce the winners. And as to the second part, if an applicant loses possession of the building, you will have to notify. It's not, my understanding is that it's not a deal breaker. It would be pretty draconian for them to make it a deal breaker and really go against the social equity component of and the intent of the law. So I think it's really just going to be, you need to, of course, let them know that there's a material change to your application. And of course, find a new location. I don't know how long you would have to do so, but of course, it's in everyone's interest to do it as quickly as possible.
Right, and which is why what we're talking about now in terms of looking for new space would be so important that you're close, you're down the path on that. Great, thank you. Here's another question. How do you balance having the dispensary to help the underserved areas versus security and safety versus customers with money to spend?
Can I take that one?
Sure.
There's a number of things that you have to consider. First of all, you really don't know exactly where you're going to be able to go yet. You know where you may want to go. You don't know who's going to accept you. And then even once you get into an area, depending on where you go, let's say Chicago, you may be in a lottery and it may not be an underserved area, or it may not be the area you intended. There's a lot of ground to cover before you get there. However, there are a few things that you need to consider in your plan, no matter what the plan. And this goes back to knowing your target, planning to deliver an entire experience to your target also has to do with the type of place that you choose. Your security is part of that. So here's where that pro team really comes into play. Let's say that you are in an area where your security needs to be more, let's say, physical, where you have to have more gates or things that people see for whatever reason. And it's starting to look prison-like. So you want to be able to work with people that can understand how to design for safety, but yet appeal. And there's a trick to it. Sure, people can do that. They can protect you and your customers, your products, and your people and your staff, and at the same time create a welcoming environment for people. And that all goes into the design, your planning, and that goes back to that team you're going to have.
Awesome. So it can be done. That's encouraging.
Absolutely.
And also don't forget that there may be a neighborhood that in and of itself, there's not a lot of opportunity for people with a lot of cash to spend, but you might not be very far from an area that there is. So like, especially, you could be in Illinois and close to Munster, or close to, some place where there is more disposable income. And why not be able to serve that community as well?
I like to bring up for the group, Amy and I had a discussion. I was telling her about some of the dispensaries that I had been in, and I strongly suggest, if you haven't already done so, of course, to go and to take a look, because when you look at these different business models, you see so many different things. And the best urban dispensary in Illinois was in downstate Bloomington. I was completely floored when I walked in. So one of the things to address the security concern, one of the things that they had that I thought was amazing, they had this, when you walk in, you walk down this long hallway, but you didn't realize it was a long hallway. Why? They had iPads with buds on them everywhere. And it was the most visually stimulating, beautiful thing. You're like, wow, it's so pretty. So you're not realizing you're walking down into a long man trap. So get out, look at other people, see what they're doing, and think about these things, because design is thoughtful, and I think you should get out, get some ideas.
That's a great point. Okay, here's another one. Are there zoning classifications in Chicago that do not require a special permit process? Are there classifications or locations that do not require a zoning change? Locations that are properly already zoned? That's probably an Ian question.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm actually looking at the ordinance right now because I don't think that there's anything that is permitted anymore. There might be, I think they changed everything to a special use. There was one of the original drafts had, I think, the manufacturing districts as a permitted use, but it looks like, I'm just refreshing my memory here. I'm pretty sure everything's a special use. There's definitely places that that it's you don't need a zoning change though, of course.
Yeah, that'd be easier. That makes it one thing easier then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you don't need a zoning change, that it does make it significantly easier. So,
Awesome.
sorry, Amy, go ahead.
No,
Ian,
no, that's great.
That list that Ian's going to provide, is that going to have a list of the towns that are amenable to cannabis, which therefore would, make the zoning issue easier?
Yes, yeah, it has the list that we were keeping up until the winter. So there may be some new additions to that, but there was a big glut that came through sometime between October and December. So it should be, it should give at least people a decent start at where to look.
Awesome. Okay, I do not see any other questions out there. Is there anybody else who wants to ask something?
It looks like there was a chat that just came through, Amy.
Yeah, I see something in the chat.
Maybe it was just a comment. Oh, any advice?
I see it. Yep. Okay. They claim to want to bring economic development to communities that have been impacted by the war on drugs, but a lot of these communities are surrounded by many churches, vacant lots, and vacant buildings in Black communities. A lot of these properties are not zoned under the permitted use. With these challenges, how can we really put a dispensary and or craft grow in our communities? Do you have any advice on how to think about
No, that makes a lot of sense. And what this person, Quandra, I believe, is talking about is that you have, just like all the other things that are going on in our community, you have a lot of things going on and they're impacting different things, and there's no one set answer for anything. What I will want you to understand is that you do need to understand the challenges of the community you're going into. For instance, some communities don't want dispensaries there because they feel that they're, the people in their communities are already poor, and that's going to take more revenue from the community members, and also to start addictions where they couldn't begin. So you need to have enough education yourself to be able to say why that's not going to happen and how it's going to have a positive impact. But you also want to understand too, is that the place for your business model? Can it make money to help the community? Is it really, what is the word, taking away from the community by you being there? So these are definitely challenges. However, if let's say you were manufacturing infusion, and you only hire people who have zip codes that are in the impacted community, if you give a percentage of your products to the local churches to give away, if you give samples, if you hire out of the prisons, see, these are ways that you impact communities, period. No matter where you are, you can still do these things. But the actual true question is, will your business be a boon to the community? And you have to be able to answer that. If your business is such that you're making a ton of money, it's attracting a lot of attention and problems and issues, well, you shouldn't expect people to want to, absorb that. But when you're trying to do something with the community, as you're saying, the first thing is to understand what the community is looking for. And I think that that's the way to figure out how to create solutions, is by understanding what the solutions, the problems are of the neighborhood. Keeping in mind that you, depending on what your license is, you don't know where you're going to be right now. So.
Awesome. Well, I cannot thank the two of you enough. I think that we probably run our course. We probably run up a little bit beyond the time. Thank you for spending your Tuesday afternoon with us. Thank you, everybody who joined us. We would very much appreciate to get your feedback. There was a survey as you close out of here that will be available. We can only adjust and make things relevant as per the feedback we get. We will be back at you in about 2 weeks and 1 day. In the meanwhile, thank you, Holly. Thank you, Ian. Ian, good luck in your next station. We will definitely make sure to be in touch. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today.
Ian, thank you for all the help you've given me in the past.
Of course, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, Amy and Holly. It's been wonderful working with you guys. And thank you for everyone for coming out to these meetings. It's been great to know a lot of you, and I hope to continue to help out as much as I can.
Awesome.
I
Thanks.
feel the same way. If any of you have any, and by the way, I do not have a referral for a broker, but if anyone has any real estate questions that you want to pose to Amy that you weren't able to articulate through here, she'll field them to me and I'll be happy to pass back.
Actually, I think we are getting a couple others, so I'll make sure that they are, if people could tell me who they are, I can get the questions out to them. Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. Take care, Ian.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, bye.
Take care.